If you've ever tried to kill a sandbur, you know they just won't die. That's because you're doing it wrong. But after years of my feet getting wrecked by these tiny little daggers of fury, I've finally discovered how to stop sandburs forever with what I like to call my secret weapon. Today in the Dude Shop, my secret weapon for nuking sandburs once and for all. Let's get to it. Before we dive into the annihilation of these little bastards, let's talk about what they are and why they're so difficult to get rid of. Sandburs are a perennial grassy weed and they thrive in dry, sandy, nutrient-poor soil. These little pods at the top are basically seed pods covered in spikes. Why should you care? Well, this spike is their nasty weapon of choice, and they act like tiny little strips of Velcro clinging to everything in sight. Dog hair, shoe bottoms, shoelaces, sweatpants, lawnmower decks, tires, and worst of all, your feet. That is, until they decide to fall off in the most random of places, whether that's inside or outside. At best, you get one of these in your bedroom carpet and it finds your foot like a sharp Lego in the night. Worst case though, is that they drop off in the grass and dig right into the ground. You see, these seeds typically germinate when the soil temperatures reach about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, making the late spring or early summer prime time growing season. Now that you've gotten a useless PhD in sandbur biology, let's talk about some of the common mistakes people make when they try to eradicate this pestilence from their yards. Common mistake number 1. Mow them down. If you don't know any better, your likely first thought is to just drop the deck on your sweet ride and mow those MFers down like Mel Gibson in a Mad Max movie. At first, you'll bask in the victory, thinking you've swiftly defeated this axis of evil in hopes that life in your backyard can once again get back to normal. But you'd be wrong. Don't do it. The problem lies inside the sandbur itself. Remember, this is actually a seed pod. The average sandbur weed has about 20 seed pods or so and roughly 4 seeds per pod. That's 80 seeds per plant, and who knows, you may have hundreds or thousands in your yard depending on how bad the problem is. And then you run your mower blades over the top and it chops them up and redistributes all those seeds through your perfectly calibrated broadcast spreader, known as your mower deck. And now you just planted 8,000 new seeds in no time flat. You may think you've won, but those seeds will germinate into the ground and come back even worse than before, and that's exactly opposite of what we're trying to do here. Common mistake number 2, using that stupid roller wheel you see on Facebook ads. Not only is this a laborious back-breaking method, it actually doesn't work that well. That is, if your long-term hope is relief from the spiked invaders. Yes, it does grab some of the existing seed pods, and I do mean some. But it's a temporary relief because unless you get 100% of the seeds, they're likely to just pop up again next season or even later that summer if you have a long mowing season like I do. In fact, the seeds can stay dormant in the ground for 7 to 8 years before they lose their potency and finally break down in the soil. That's the real reason they're so hard to kill. They're like silent assassins that sit for years just waiting for you to turn your back before they strike. When you pick the seed heads with this wheeled contraption, you may get some of the tops, that's true, but some of the seeds will inevitably knock loose and end up dropping back into the soil just to start the whole diabolical plan all over again. Common mistake number 3, drench them with Roundup. Now, this is, at best, a questionable method. Yes, this might seem like an easier option, but the results will not be what you expect. In fact, before I knew any better, I actually tried this one year and absolutely nuked the sandburs with Roundup in my yard. I sprayed so much Roundup, in fact, it made the napalm they used in Vietnam pale in comparison. I'm quite certain the EPA would have literally fined me had they known how much of this stuff I actually put on my yard. But don't tell anybody, okay? 2 weeks later, they sprouted right back up like nothing had ever happened. Again. But here's why it didn't work. Roundup, or glyphosate, simply put, uses chemicals to disturb the normal amino acid production of the plant. Without these essential amino acids, the plant usually dies over the next week or 2, and it works out pretty well. Unfortunately, the sandbur plant has adapted, and it's pretty resilient against this type of chemical. It has a thick outer skin that acts like a coat of armor and protects the vital organs inside. Because of this, the chemical never actually penetrates deep into the plant tissue. And so, all you're really doing is giving it a poison bath and killing your Bermuda in the process. Not to mention all the potentially negative side effects by using Roundup on your yard. But that's still in litigation, so we'll see. Common mistake number 4, burn them. I bought a Mr. Heater blowtorch and went to town.
It's time for a showdown! Come and get me!
It was fun, but after a lot of work, I still had seed pods in my yard, which only germinated and came back again the next year. I do recommend the Mr. Heater blowtorch for other things though. It's really a lot of fun. Okay, enough rambling. Now that we know what not to do, let's talk about what I've learned over the past 5 years of trial and error. This way, you'll be able to go straight to the secret nuclear weapon, and I promise, this is the Sandbur solution if you're looking to get rid of them. And I got rid of 100% of all the Sandburs in my yard for good. Step 1. This step is by far the most critical of all the steps. I put down a full coverage pre-emergent chemical that specifically targets Sandburs. I'll share the name of that chemical here in just a bit, but this isn't just a spray once and forget it kind of battle like you do with broadleaf weeds each season. Think of this as a multi-step, potentially multi-year process, depending on how bad your problem is. I was able to get rid of all the Sandburs in my yard in 1 season. Quick note, you may not know this, but most commercial weed companies don't actually spray for Sandburs. I'm not saying they can't, but they just typically don't. A majority of what they spray for is crabgrass, broadleaf weeds, and a few other common weeds found in your specific region. Because of that, I do my own spraying and I apply a chemical in a methodical application pattern to ensure a full coverage over the whole yard. Even just a little gap in the spray pattern will allow the seeds of the Sandbur plant to germinate and pop right back up through the soil later in the summer. Ideally, I apply this pre-emergent in February or March before germination starts, and then once more in the fall, like October, November timeframe. Quick caution here though, if I plan on seeding or sodding, I do not put down a pre-emergent beforehand. The reason is that the chemical will inhibit root growth and basically kill all the money and effort that you just put into all that new grass. Instead, I put down the seed or sod, allow it to root in for about 6 to 8 weeks or so, and then apply the pre-emergent over the top of the new grass to ensure that it gets into the soil and protects against future Sandburs. If I have the time, I like to do a split application to ensure that I don't shock the new grass too badly. To do this, I do a 50% strength application about 6 to 8 weeks after sod, and then another 50% or half rate application a month after that. That generally does the trick and keeps the new grass nice and happy. Okay, so I did step 1, I put down the pre-emergent, but let's say I have existing Sandburs already in my yard. What do I do then? That's where step number 2 comes in. It's kind of an as-required thing. You hand pull the Sandbur plants. And now, I'm not gonna lie, this method is a bitch, but it offers the best chance of success in getting the whole plant, the roots, and all of the seed pods. And obviously, this will help lessen the outbreak come midsummer when it warms up again. At the risk of sounding like a weenie, I've got to admit here, I used gloves. I'm not much of a masochist, so I just used a welder's glove right here. Don't judge. It's what I had. It's long, it's thick, and it gets the job done.
That's what she said!
Another method I've done in the past is use a spade shovel to scoop the plant out of the soil. That gets the roots and everything. This usually gets most of the seeds and roots, and I personally think it's a little easier than hand pulling by itself. But then you have a bunch of divots in your yard you kind of have to repair, so proceed at your own risk and do what works for you. A quick side note, do not do this at your home. Now, I haven't personally tried it, but I know a guy. We'll call him John. John sprayed a post-emergent chemical called MSMA to weaken the existing Sandbur plants. And it seemed like it might have worked pretty well because the MSMA targets the leaves and stems way better than using Roundup alone. It stops the seasonal growth and makes it easier to pull the weeds a few weeks after the application, specifically because of the weakened root system. Now, this stuff is strictly prohibited for use on residential yards, and I'm not, in any way, advocating that you use it. But you can get it online without a license. So now that we've covered step 1, put down a pre-emergent, and step 2, remove the existing Sandbur plants, step number 3, increase the turf density of your yard. Now, I'm not getting into fertilizers and soil amendments and all that stuff. That's outside the scope of this video. But I do want to mention real quick the importance of a grass root density and it helping fight Sandburs. Think of a thick, full turf as a blanket that covers the whole yard. For every spot that doesn't have that full blanket coverage, you're just asking for Sandburs to germinate. That's why they call them Sandburs and not grass burrs. Step number 4, maintenance. Once you have all the actively growing sandbur seed pods out of your yard, all you have to do is spray twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall, like I said. Why keep spraying year after year? Well, remember, these stay in the ground for 7 to 8 years. So you have to actively inhibit the germination until all the seeds have died in the ground. 7 to 8 years. Or you increase your turf density so thick that it's not an issue anymore and they can't poke through anyway. But that takes a lot of time and effort. The details of my personal experience, notice I didn't say recommendation because they aren't recommendations. The lawyers made me say that. Okay, so what products do I use? Well, for sandbur specifically, I found that Prowl H2O with an active ingredient, pendimethalin, works pretty well. This targets sandburs and crabgrass, but it's limited on the other types of weeds it defends against. For me, if I'm going to spend the time and money on spraying and chemicals, I want it to cover as many weeds as possible, specifically sandburs though. For that reason, Prowl is not my #1 choice for pre-emergent, but hey, you do you. Other common brands of pendimethalin are Drexel Pen D and Ike's Sandbur and Crabgrass Preventer. They work okay, but here's my secret weapon of choice, also known as the chemical I use to nuke every sandbur in my yard for good. It's called indaziflam. This chemical is sold under the names Spectacle Flow and Resilin. Spectacle Flow is intended for residential areas and has an active ingredient concentration of 7.4%. Per the label, I have to use between 6 and 9 ounces per acre. With Resilin though, it has a higher active ingredient concentration of 19.05% and it's only intended for agricultural use. So I wouldn't put this on my residential yard. The reason I like Spectacle Flow for my yard is because it only has to be applied twice a year. Again, once in the spring and once in the fall. I feel like a broken record here. Those 2 applications alone will last me the full year for sandbur and weed control. I might have to spot spray some broadleaf weeds here and there, like maybe some dandelions midsummer, but it won't be many. In addition to only having to spray twice a year, the list of the weeds that it covers is pretty impressive. Check this out. Chickweed, clover, dandelion, pigweed, ragweed, spurge, crabgrass, foxtail, goosegrass, nutsedge, and sandburs. And that's not even the full comprehensive list. Look at the label for that. But those are the most common weeds in warm season grasses like Bermuda, which is what I have. Now, last thing, if you go to Google and search for Spectacle Flow, you're gonna have sticker shock, literally. It's expensive per bottle, no question about it. But let's break those numbers down for just a second. An 18-ounce bottle, which is what I bought, I got it for $254 online. And this is the way I justify the purchase. I have a 1-acre yard, I spray 9 ounces twice a year. That's 1 bottle of $254 per year. Now, go get a quote from a commercial spray company and see what their prices are. A couple of years ago, before I did my own spraying, they quoted me $1,800 to spray 6 times with their custom chemical mix. That probably didn't even cover sandburs. No thanks. I'll do the $254 for 1 year of my own. And just so you can't sue me if something goes wrong, if it wasn't obvious, this video is only intended to show how I personally have dealt with sandburs in my warm season grasses, like Bermuda. If you choose to follow what I've done, understand what you're doing and doing it at your own risk, and do not, under any circumstances, do this on cool season grasses like fescue. So there you have it. My fellow sandbur victims, let's rise up and take back our yards. Hit that like button and let's destroy these motherfuckers together. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.